They cut my padlock in the dead of night and left a red smear on the gate like a promise. Then they printed a polite letter and slid it under my door the next morning, as if courtesy could hide a lie. I remember standing there with oil on my hands, the sun crawling up over my property, thinking, people fight over money, sure, but nobody ever warned me they'd fight over the idea of ownership itself. My name's Eli Brooks. I built the place with my own 2 hands. I run a small tech shop out of the barn, and I keep to myself until the neighborhood decided I shouldn't. The letters started simple. Friendly reminder. Community standards. We'd love to welcome you. They smelled like varnish and lawyers, all sugar and fine print. Then the emails came: surveys, demands to correct fences, a threat about non-compliance fines buried between a recipe for community barbecue. You ever notice how the nastiest things were the nicest words? Yeah, me too. At first I thought it was petty neighbors, someone who didn't like my truck, someone who liked rules more than freedom. But petty doesn't leave footprints that loop to a private security warehouse, and petty doesn't send a crew with clipboards pretending to be city inspectors while they measure the wrong lines and take the wrong photographs. That was different. That was calculated. And when my cameras started feeding static, when deliveries were turned away because the road is private now, I realized. I called the sheriff. He shrugged. He filled out a form. He said, "Join the association, Eli. It'll be easier." That's a laugh. Them saying join is like telling a fish to join the river. I don't join. I fix what I can. I keep receipts. I plant my evidence the way my dad planted tomatoes, carefully, with labels. There was a man at the center of it all with a smile that looked like a billboard. Darren Wells, HOA president, community liaison, fundraiser, whatever hat he wanted to wear that day. To his face, he was helpful. Behind his back, he was manager of a small army. He argued meetings like someone reading from a script. He smiled like he was sealing a deal every time a hand went in a pocket. I met him once, outside a town hall. He said, "Eli, we only want what's best for everyone." I said, "Darren, what's best?" He laughed then, that soft, practiced laugh. "You don't have to be dramatic." And that was the first time I understood he was comfortable with telling other people's stories for them. So I fought back the only way a stubborn person with tools and friends knows how. I documented everything. Noah, my old consultant buddy, wired the network to a honeypot. He said, "Leave breadcrumbs, Eli. Let them come get lost." Ava, our lawyer, wrote subpoenas that read like torpedoes. We set cameras that couldn't be jammed easily. We logged GPS routes of trucks that came and went late at night. And one morning on a stakeout that smelled like coffee and bad sleep, we watched men unload equipment in the dark. Watching them unload was the moment the story decided to stop being a rumor and started being evidence. We trailed a truck, and what felt like a small victory turned into a deep cut when we discovered invoices tying the HOA to payments routed through shell accounts. Money flowed like a secret river, and Darren had his hand on the dam. The escalation felt like a muscle memory. First the vandalism, then the legal notices, then the staging of fake survey team that convinced one neighbor that my property line was wrong, a code enforcement officer who misreads city maps on purpose. They turned the neighborhood into a stage and cast me as the only character who didn't know his lines. People started to talk differently in the grocery store, like they were reading from a social script. Avoid conflict, be neighborly, don't cause trouble. I felt small in a place I had built. We filed subpoenas, we dragged records into daylight, and then the meeting came. Courtroom air, fluorescent and thin, the kind of room that makes you feel both small and very visible. Darren showed up in a suit that fit like a promise. He'd brought his smile and a half-dozen residents with polite faces. He called us disruptors in a voice meant to make disruption sound dangerous. I listened. The judge put my tape on the screen, grainy footage of armored trucks, men stacking equipment, invoices with dates and routes. In court, things had a different kind of rhythm. Ava spoke in loops and precision. She turned a pile of invoices into a story, and that story was about motive. "This is about control," she said. "This is about a board that monetized the neighborhood's fear." You could see the way some people shifted in their chairs, like they'd been handed a different script and didn't recognize the lines. Darren's smile thinned when she read a transcript where he told a subcontractor, "Make sure Brooks understands his place." There's a kind of quiet that falls when a man hears his own voice say something he forgot he'd said. But there was a last act, because cornered things do not go gentle. The night before the final injunction, someone cut the main power line to my barn. They slashed cables, smashed lights, tried to make the quiet louder. Noah and I fought through that night. Like two men walking through someone else's memory, we patched servers with tape and whispered profanity. We dragged generators into the shadows. We listened for footsteps and held our breath like a prayer. At dawn, we had what we needed. Ava walked into court with a flash drive like a talisman and a stack of bank records redacted only where it mattered. We played footage of men moving through the warehouse, footage of invoices, and an audio clip of Darren congratulating a subcontractor on making sure Eli understood his place. The judge watched, he read, and he signed an order that felt like the first time someone believed your side of the story. Victory tasted like gravel and paper. The injunction froze HOA accounts. There were subpoenas to Guardian City, and Darren's smile got a little smaller in the pictures the papers ran. But that's where the victory ends and the reckoning begins. Because even with the court on your side, neighborhood rules have roots, and roots run deep in people's fears. Some neighbors thanked us with casseroles and hugs. Others still looked at me like I was the reason their weekend was complicated. The aftermath was quieter than anyone would have promised. I rebuilt the server rack with Noah, and we painted the gate a shade that said, "I was here." Some folks came around slowly, like frost thawing. Others packed up and moved as if the house needed a new start. Darren resigned not because of a single moment of conscience, but because his options dwindled. The law is not a conscience, it's a tool. The real change was in conversations at the feed store, in PDA lines. In the choir loft, people started to ask slightly different questions. Not, how do we enforce? But, who am I when I live next to someone I barely know? I don't tell this story to celebrate a win, it's not clean enough for that. I tell it because standing up showed me the cost. I lost nights. I lost friends who were too scared to be seen. I learned that justice is not a single hammer, but a slow, noisy process. I learned how much work it is to be a steward of your own small piece of the world. If I have one thing to leave you with, and you can argue with me on this in the comments if you want, it's this: documentation matters. Neighbors matter. Courage matters, but courage without a plan is just noise. And lastly, never underestimate how quickly we can become them when someone decides to monetize the idea of belonging. So if this story lands with you, if it irritates you, or comforts you, or makes you furious, say something about it. Tell whether Eli was right to stand alone, or whether community is more complicated than a single man on a gate. Tell where you would have drawn the line. Share the worst neighbor story you've got, and if you've ever been in a fight that felt bigger than you thought it would be, tell how you survived. I read everything. And if you liked the way this played out, hit like, share T.